Testing, testing. Testing, testing. So anyway, I wanted to before we start the official interview, I just wanted
Mm.
to do talk to you a little bit. I want to make sure that I introduce you correctly. Um, I read your bio and I was blown away and simultaneously going, what is this? And so I tried to do a little bit of homework because it's a field that's so far removed from what I do, and part of the interview I would love to learn more, and you'll have to forgive me. I'll ask you to explain it to me as if I'm a second grader.
No, not at all.
And so you'll have to give me the idiot's guide to big data. But let me just read you what I'm going to do is I'll record separately before our interview starts. I'll record an intro before ours begins. And so tell me if there's anything you want to change about this, or if there's anything I have that's inaccurate. So I'll say that Jenny is an expert in big data, semantic technology, data analytics, machine learning, and I pulled a lot of this from your bio, natural language processing and e-communication surveillance. She is currently the head of innovation at KogoPAY and also a managing partner of Nightingale Consulting, providing consultancy services on innovative solutions for big data, machine learning, and e-com surveillance um, in a socially responsible space. And prior to this role, she spent 20 years at, is it Credit Suisse? Am I
Yeah.
saying it correctly?
No, it's perfect.
Okay. Most recently as the global head of electronic communication surveillance. Is that accurate, and would you change anything about that for kind of your average listener who may not know what everything is?
No, that sounds great. What I might do is maybe also add that I am currently sitting on a board of a NHS hospital in the UK, and just so this is quite relevant to kind of what's
Yes.
happening in the health space right now.
Okay. Also serves on board of an NHS hospital.
Yeah, I mean, if you rather type it out and then I can then send it back to you so that I can like
Okay.
either condense it if that's easier for you, then I'm perfectly happy to do that too.
Okay. I'll make a note. I'll send to you and that you'll condense it and edit. Okay. Great.
Since we're
Okay.
going to
Because I
record
can,
it separately anyway, and it's
yeah.
easier for me to just kind of type it out rather than you end up pulling bits here and there and then wasting your time.
Perfect. Yeah, no, thank you. That's great. Okay. Well, I don't want to I'm not going to throw any curveballs. I hope that it's conversational just like this. I'll give you a preview of what we'll talk about. I'll start out just asking you to tell me a little bit about yourself and, where you grew up, how you grew up, the influences in getting you to where you are today. Um, and I'll talk about how you have worn a lot of hats over the years, and to give us a primer for the listeners who have no idea what what you do, right? And oh, quick question: what % of women do you think are in your field and in your role that you play?
Oh, good question. Haven't really done the research around that.
Ballpark.
It is very, very tiny because I know that usually when I go for conferences or I talk to my industry peers, I'm usually the only woman there.
Yeah.
And I guess because my background has been quite diverse in the sense
Hmm.
that I have bounced around between investment banking, technology,
Mm,
and so it's very hard to find the kind of person that kind of has had my career path
yeah.
too.
Very
But
unique.
in
Okay.
technology, I think it's pretty small.
Single digits.
Probably, yeah. And again, it
Yeah.
really depends which part of technology. Because if you look at application development, you probably have quite a few people there now, girls now, because they've kind of started coming up that path. But if you look
Right.
at artificial intelligence, then it gets even smaller. That's quite a kind of a niche field.
Okay. We
So
can delve into that. Yeah, I'll ask you the question and we can delve into that in the interview. And then I'll talk about just influential people in your career, mentors, talk a little bit about the, mentors being men versus women, a little bit of imposter syndrome, obstacles and challenges. And then at the end, I like to finish with a piece of advice for girls or women who want to do what you do, um, and just kind of general life/career advice. And then I will finish with asking you if our listeners want to find out a little bit more about you online, where to look. So, okay. All right,
okay,
let me turn on the, oh yeah, I'm recording. And by the way, I am going to record the video part. I actually am just doing that to have it. I don't have a necessary plan for what I'm going to do with it yet. But maybe little snippets for highlights.
no
So,
problem. Of
all
course, yeah.
right.
Sometimes it's easier when you look at a video and you can see that person. You feel more of that person's personality as opposed to kind of just
Absolutely.
listening to it.
I agree. I agree. Okay. All right. So, I'll pause with a moment of silence and then we'll start. Hi, Jenny. Thank you so much for being on with me today. I'm really excited to have you here.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here, Nancy.
I would love to start out with knowing a little bit more about you, who you are, what shaped you, what your childhood and your upbringing was like, and how you ended up from, point A to point B.
I'm not a young spring chicken, so I think my life journey can be quite long. But what I'll do is I'll try to condense my life and my career. Then maybe, as you say, highlight some points or some significant moments that actually shaped who I am. Um, so I would say, as a kind of like summary headline, my life has always been about change and adapting to change. So I was actually born in the UK, but when I was 5, my parents looked at me and my younger sister and they say, "Hey, this Chinese face can't speak Chinese. That's bad." So they actually moved the entire family over to Singapore, where I
Ah,
grew up and I had my education there. Um, and then when I was 16, I came back to the UK by myself to attend boarding school. And then I stayed for university and then I started working here. So I would say, in terms of my formative years, it has very much taught me to embrace change, to be
mm-hmm.
independent, plus also instilled in me the sense of curiosity and the sense of adventure. But and kind of like where I have come to in my professional life, when you are young, you always think, what should I be when I grow up? And you kind of like struggling, you don't really know. So I actually want to be a pilot when I was really young.
Ah.
Which is obviously wishful thinking because I actually don't even drive a car right now, which is utterly shameful. So then pilots, obviously that was not going to happen. So I then decided I want to be an archaeologist. But when I told my parents, you get this strange look and say, "You really sure?" It's really, well, in the generation of my parents, it's probably not a career they particularly encouraged. So I
Mm-hmm.
ended up going the traditional route. I ended up doing maths and economics at the London School of Economics and then joined Credit Suisse, which is a Swiss American investment bank, right after graduation. And that was where I spent the last 20 years of my life in investment banking, where I started on the equities trade floor. Then every few years, I would kind of wake up and feel like I need change. It's almost like
Mm-hmm.
I was suffocating in my comfort zone. So I always moved to a different role. And my role has been quite diverse in the sense that I started on the equities trade floor. I then worked in client relationship management. I worked in engineering, software development, project management, but all in the investment banking context. So my very last role within financial services was actually in big data and artificial intelligence, where I was the global head of electronic communication surveillance. And that's quite a mouthful. So really kind of what does that mean? It means that I was responsible for a platform about detecting signals of malicious behavior and market abuse on communication channels. And communication channels being things like email, chat platforms, voice recordings, and we would use behavioral algorithms and machine learning.
Mm-hmm.
Machine learning being we would use things like deep learning or natural language processing to understand the way humans behave,
Mm-hmm.
understand the way people speak and the context of how they're speaking to identify if they're potentially doing something that is abusive and malicious. So last summer, I woke up and again, I felt that familiar feeling about I need change once again. And the only difference this time with the change I wanted was I wanted to do something that was more socially impactful. So right now, I am doing actually a number of part-time roles. Firstly, I'm the head of innovation and data analytics for KogoPAY. That is a fintech startup, does mobile payments, mobile wallets, and it's got this social impact agenda at its heart. And that was kind of what attracted me to them. Secondly, I'm also on the board of a UK hospital, which is a interesting but also challenging time given the coronavirus that we have right now. Thirdly, I also get involved in some side projects where we're seeing if we can leverage artificial intelligence on medical images to hopefully improve the accuracy of cancer detection. So that's kind of like a professional level, but on a
Mm-hmm.
personal level,
Mm-hmm.
I want to kind of challenge myself and also continue learning. So I'm also doing a number of part-time university courses on Middle Eastern arts and culture.
That's amazing.
So
You're truly
I love
a
to learn more.
Renaissance woman
Not at all, not
in
at
the
all.
truest sense.
But that's kind of like my professional life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what about five significant moments that I think might have shaped the person and made me who I am? So, if I think back, the first moment was probably when I was about 4 years old and I was in nursery in the UK. I used to get bullied a lot in the playground, and that's because I looked Chinese. So
Mm-hmm.
even though I was born in the UK and I spoke in exactly the same accent everybody else, I looked different, so I was picked upon. So if I take away positives, being an eternal optimist about the situation I was in at the time, I would say it taught me about racism, taught me
Mm-hmm.
about herd mentality, and life will never be fair, but what I can do is try to handle it with grace and stoicism. So that's the first moment. The second moment I would say was when I was 16, when I came to the UK,
Mm-hmm.
and all by myself. So that taught me independence, taught me resilience. I'm in a strange world, all by myself. You learn quite quickly to do things like financial budgeting, logistics around travel, accommodation. Plus, I was actually very appreciative of the education that the Singapore environment had given me because it really gave me a good foundation in terms of rigor and discipline.
Mm-hmm.
The third moment was when I entered the working world, and that's being a female in a male dominated industry. Not only that, technology in investment banking, you can't really get much worse than that. So I learned to have confidence in my own abilities. I felt that working hard and putting your head down doesn't always get you noticed. So what you have to do is learn how to raise your profile, grow your network of allies and sponsors. And I think most importantly, actually positively embrace your differences by turning that into a USP.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the third moment. The fourth moment is probably when I started managing teams in my career. So
Mm-hmm.
throughout my career, I've seen good managers, I've seen bad managers. And the thing is, people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad managers. And you're only as strong as the weakest member in your team. So I don't think people come into work to necessarily do a bad job. I think they might be just doing the wrong job if they're not performing. So it's really my job as a manager to identify what their strengths are, what their passions are, and ensure I put them into the right role. So I always tell my teams, I say, make sure you bring your real authentic self to work. Because if you try to sustain a personality, a different personality at work than it is at home, it's quite draining. So I usually tell them in my teams, well, try to work to these three core principles. One is integrity. Always do what you feel is right and do what you commit to. Second is about respect. Treat everyone with respect, no matter who they are. And third is have a good sense of humor. smile, enjoy what you do. So that
I
was the
love that.
fourth significant moment, managing teams. And I will come to an end soon because I know this is quite a long
That's
answer.
okay. I love
It's
it.
around the it's around the fifth significant moment, and that was having kids. Um, they have taught me to be selfless, taught me to be
Mm-hmm.
more aware that the actions I do have quite a character-defining impact upon them.
Yeah.
How I behave and my values are very important. But they've also taught me a lot more about patience and anger management. So those are the five
True.
defining moments, I think, that hopefully make me a more authentic person.
Right. Oh, there's so I love it. Thank you so much. There is so much too that I want to unpack there. Let's go back to your one of your pivotal moments when you were 4. I have to say that I had a very similar experience too, as as an Asian American. I was born here and had no accent. English was my first language, but eh, sometimes you have that moment where you realize, I actually look different to them, even though I don't feel different. And I remember in preschool, I was put into an ESL class without anyone ever having tested me. They put me in the English as a second language class, and they were showing me pictures of a cat, and they said, "What is this?" And I said, "Well, that's a cat." And they quickly realized, "Oh, okay, I don't belong there. I belong in the regular class. I have no issues with English," but very similar experience to you, where I had that recognition that, well, when you look different because you are ethnically different, even if you are a UK citizen or an American citizen, that there is going to be someone who's going to treat you differently or think of you differently based upon just that. And
Mhm.
so I loved hearing about how you experienced that as well, because I think it's pretty universal.
And it kind of doesn't go away too. So when you're young, you take it a lot more to heart, and you go,
Hmm.
"Why does this happen to me? Life is unfair." But as you get
Right.
older, and like when you go to the working space, and you're like, "Okay, I'm the only female now in my industry. Maybe again,
Hmm.
I'm the only female minority in the space that I'm working in," and and it makes you one more resilient, and you just have to kind of grow a really thick skin about it. And I used to be, I
Right.
know, very self-conscious about maybe my accent. It's kind of different. It's mishmash of like a British accent and a Singaporean accent. And I
I
was
think
very
it's lovely,
self-conscious when I
by
was
the way.
coming. It's so weird when you hear yourself back again, you know. But actually, I mentioned about embracing the difference. And I realized that, when I'm on a conference call, I no longer have to introduce myself as Jenny Chong. I'm like, they'll probably know who I am immediately. So we cut down the time difference. And also people, it, almost like they recognize you straight away. You're not just blending into the crowd.
Right. And so that's definitely, you can turn it around and make it something positive.
Hmm.
And so you mentioned that sometimes you would be the only female in the meeting or the female in the workplace, and just like in orthopedics, where we're in the single digits as far as women, and then when you look at how many of those women are actually people of color, then that number goes down even further. Can you share with me what roughly what the percentages were like? Now, I'm not even looking for numbers, but just kind of what the experience was like in the various fields that you've worked throughout your career.
Yeah, I think in investment banking, it's still very much a male-dominated space. Um, and probably about kind of like 10-15% tend to be women. And also
Mm,
you tend to find maybe more women in specific areas within the bank. So you might find them more within, say, project management or within the
mm,
HR space. So the space that I've worked in, which is in technology, it has been phenomenally small. And even now, you don't see basically when I go for conferences, technology conferences, I usually look at a sea of men, and I hardly see any women out there. Even when I go for meetings, again, I'm the only woman there. So yes, we need to shift the needle on that. And so what I try to do is encourage the younger generations to adopt STEM a lot more.
mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I was actually speaking to someone recently at a conference, and she is currently in Cambridge. She's done pretty well for herself, and she was doing computer science. And she told me that it was only in the last few years that her school started teaching technology as a subject for girls, because she was in a girls' school, so they tend to go for very kind of
Wow.
like different subjects. And she's like, it was only in the last few years that she kind of thought that is interesting, because I would have thought we have shifted the needle probably only 10, 15 years ago, but it was only a few years. So that's actually really disappointing.
Right. That is disappointing. I mean, that is like just blanket removal of STEM from the entire curriculum for an entire school and potentially that whole generation. That's unbelievable. But I'm glad that they've shifted and they've started to introduce STEM in
Yeah.
the
But to
curriculum.
not even give them that opportunity to, as you say, to totally
Yeah.
remove it.
It's kind of like you how do you even have the opportunity to say whether you like it or you don't like it? It's almost like you don't know what you don't know, right? Because
Hmm.
it was never presented.
Exactly.
And so, and one of the reasons I started this podcast was I was walking through an airport and I saw a commercial pilot. Um, and it was a woman and I realized, you never see women pilots, maybe a little bit more now, but definitely a rarity. And I started thinking about how we have such parallel experiences. And when you say you walk into a meeting and it's a sea of, well, being in the financial and the tech industry, probably all gray and black suits, right? A
Hmm.
lot of gray,
Hmm.
black, and navy. Um, and that tends to be the landscape of what you see when you go to a meeting. I realize that even though we have such disparate fields, me in medicine, you in tech and in finance, um, we all have these really similar and parallel experiences sometimes. Even as you have to explain what you do to me as if I'm a second grader, I think
Hmm.
still we have a lot of really similar experiences. The other thing I wanted to ask you about that you mentioned is one of your pivotal experiences was kind of realizing that you can't sometimes just putting your head down and working isn't enough. And we hear a lot about how women don't advocate for themselves nearly as well in general compared to how men do, and that we tend to be not as comfortable with that. We tend to not want to self promote, and it's not like any of us really want to be out there and be like, "Hey, look at me." But to some extent, it's we should we should be able to share our successes and our triumphs and our strengths. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you learned to be able to do more than just put your head down and work?
Yeah, when you're young, it's hard. You just kind of think, I'm just going to work really hard. And it's the Chinese mentality, right? If you work really
Yeah.
hard, somebody's going to recognize you and reward you. But after a while, you learn that kind of that doesn't really happen. But you also mentioned about we should try to promote ourselves a lot more. And yet innately, it's very difficult to. It's kind of like, well, as I think you mentioned that before, the imposter syndrome. I think we
Mhm.
all experience that. And even after 20 years in the industry, I find it difficult to blow my trumpet. I can never shake off the imposter syndrome. Like, am I good enough? Am I more qualified than the person next to me? Do I tick all the boxes to this job? I read somewhere 70% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point in
Mhm.
their career. And, and, and someone has to think, why do we feel that? Why do we feel it more than men? And I think, well, first of all, we care because we want to do a good job. We don't want
Mhm.
to let anybody down.
Right.
And as females, it's maybe more that mothering nature in us too, because we think we're a team unit. So if somebody in the team is out, we are obliged to stand in and do that job. And that means we need to do everything that everyone in our team can do, be it
Mhm.
debug the code, be it fix the network connection. And I think being a mother also doesn't help you let go of the feelings that actually trigger the imposter syndrome, because your kids look up to you. You are that role model. You are that
Right.
superwoman, that omnipotent being who has the answer to everything, the one who can do
Right.
no wrong, the one who can multitask, the one who can solve every problem in record time. So all these are
Yep.
kind of triggers that bring about that sense of perfectionism and then hence imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
So I guess, how would I manage imposter syndrome? Well, first of all, it took me a long time to recognize that I had it. And then, when
Mhm.
you go for a course and they tell you imposter syndrome, you go, oh my God, yeah, that's the thing. Suddenly you've got words to describe that feeling. So I think probably down to three things. One is recognize that I cannot be an expert at everything. So I
I
invest
think
the
that's
time
good
to try
advice.
to hire the right people and surround myself with people that I can trust and who I know are better than me at different things. So they bring the expertise and the skills, and I bring the experience and the wisdom, and we both learn from each other. So that's the first point about recognizing I can't be an expert at everything. The
Mm-hmm.
second point is probably to recognize that I cannot be perfect, but I can be good enough. So have I done my best? And have I done the right thing? And not to be afraid to show my vulnerable side and ask for help, because people
Mm-hmm.
love being asked for help. They rarely say no. It probably fulfills that inner need of being useful. Again, like being a mom, we always want our kids to need us. So that's the second point, recognize I cannot be perfect, but I can be good enough. And the third point is around having a support network of peers, people who can very candidly share their experiences and problems. And then when you share it, you realize, hey, we're not alone. And so
Right.
this could be networks of industry peers, people who have climbed the ladder with you in terms of like promotions, people from your
Mm-hmm.
school days, your friends. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think those are the three things I use to counteract this imposter syndrome to hopefully bolster my confidence.
That's wonderful. I think that's really good tangible advice, and I think part of the battle for individuals who experience that imposter syndrome, which is so many of us, is hearing the stories of other women and hearing that somebody like you who has this amazing resume experiences imposter syndrome and still does today. I think part of the battle is just knowing you're not alone, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So, what do you think was one of your biggest obstacles in getting to where you are today and into your current roles, because you have many roles? What do you think was the biggest hurdle?
I think the biggest hurdle is probably the mindset around it.
Mhm.
When you first start, you know you're not as good. In fact, when I first joined the graduate training program in Credit Suisse, I think, there were 33 of us that joined. And on the first day that we met, kind of like networked with each other and say, what did you do at university? And what was your background? And 32 of them, they all did computer science. And I was the
Mhm.
only one that did maths and economics. And there was nothing like that to put me down. Like, oh my God, I cannot do this job. I am such a fraud. I probably shouldn't be here. But actually, that feeling then made me want to work harder. It made me
Yep.
know that I needed to prove myself. And I think I
Right.
carry that feeling throughout each and every job that I have had. Um, so it's very much that mindset change, being confident in what you do. So I mentioned that in my career, every few years I wake up the feeling that I need a change, and with every change that I did, I would, and I again it's the whole psychological mindset.
Mhm.
Whenever I move to a new job, I would feel like I'm probably not going to be good enough. I'm going to fail at this. How am I going to earn the respect of the people and the experts in the new team? And I also then, so that was like that self doubt comes in. But then self anger comes in next, because I'll ask
Mm.
myself, like, Jenny, what the hell are you doing? Why are you rocking the boat? Why are you looking
Right.
for a new role when you're so comfortable doing what you want to do? But I just find I always need to reinvent myself. I get bored. I want to change. And every day, so I work harder. I put a lot more in. I put myself out there and I try to learn as much as I can. And when you come out successfully on the other side, that's an amazing feeling. So, I can do it. I have the ability. I have the personality to do this. And so I think the biggest challenge is usually that mindset that and the
Right.
self-doubt that we create for ourselves.
I feel like a lot of times when it comes to making a pivot or shift in life and in career, that there is fear of change. Most of us are not very comfortable with change, and that it's a very discomforting place to be when you feel like you're on the brink of needing to make a change. And the safer thing and the easy thing is just to retreat back into your routine. And you hear a lot about sunk cost bias, right? Where you're like, oh, I've put so many years into doing, school or training for whatever. I have to stick with this because I've already sunk all these resources into it. So I can't change. It's not worth it. And so, I think you're right in that a lot of times it's a little bit of a mind, or maybe a lot of a mindset shift to be able to get over that hurdle, right?
And I think even though I've changed, and at a time when I'm changing to a different career, I would think that's really drastically different. But actually, if I look back on it now, life is like a journey. You have the little experiences that you bring along the way that make you a more well-rounded person. So I'm always
Hmm.
taking things I've learned in my last job, taking the management skills I've learned in my last job, and actually applying it and enhancing it in my next role. So I never truly discard everything that I've learned, but it just makes me
Yeah.
a richer person.
And I think that's something important for people to recognize, that even when they pivot and even when they shift into something new, that they're still bringing with them all of that experience. And I think that's a very important lesson. And it helps us be braver in making
Yeah,
those changes,
absolutely.
right? Yeah. So I think you've already given a lot of really great advice in terms of imposter syndrome, et cetera. But, if you had to come up with a piece of advice for a woman who wants to pursue a career similar to yours, what would that be? Life advice.
Hmm. Well, okay, I'm going to be greedy and I'm not going to just do one. I'm going to maybe give a few.
No, I
Um,
love it. That's great.
if I start with the life advice and then maybe the kind of like career advice. So, in terms of life advice, I'll probably give two. I would say, well, be your authentic self and embrace your differences. Um, People can sniff out a fraud in minutes. People know if you're
Yeah.
bullshitting. So, really make sure you are authentic. And that's how you also gain the respect of people in your team. So the second one I would say is really beggars versus choosers. So when you're
Mm-hmm.
in a tricky situation, are you the beggar or are you the chooser? Now, beggars are desperate. They start on a
Mm-hmm.
bad bargaining position. Choosers will have the upper hand, range of options, good negotiating position. So always try to make sure that you put yourself in the position where you are the chooser rather than the beggar. Of course, sometimes you have no choice. You are the beggar. And then that's where you show your vulnerable side and you ask for help because people always
Mm-hmm.
want to help. So I think that will be the life advice I have, those 2 points: authenticity, and well, put yourself in a position where you are a chooser, not a beggar. And in terms of people wanting to come into this field, people always think, oh, but it's so technical. I don't have a computer science background. But you know what? Neither did I. I had a maths background, and I never thought I'll use that maths background. But now when I work in artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's actually all about maths, all about statistics. So don't be afraid. Just come in and learn, because people are always willing to help you and teach you. So really just put yourself out there. It's like when I hire people in my team, I don't necessarily say, do you tick all the boxes? Have you done this job before? Can you do it with your eyes closed? No, I look for people who have the aptitude, people who have the potential, who want to learn. I don't expect them to hit the ground running. So the people who are fearless learners and actually are able to admit that they don't know something and are willing to ask for help, those are the people I actually pivot towards. So just be fearless. Just ask for a chance and somebody's going to give you the opportunity. So there are no barriers to entry in the space I'm in.
That's wonderful. I'm going to have to go back and listen to our transcript and look at our transcript, and then I'm going to physically take notes. And I think there were so many points from our interview that I want to actually like put on Post-it notes and stick it on my mirror so I can remember some of those tips, because I mean, just so much good tangible advice, and it's been amazing and wonderful to listen to your life story and just how you evolved and came to where you are today. So I want to thank you for being on with me. I'm so excited and I can't wait to have this episode be released. If our listeners want to learn a little bit more about you and they want to look for you online, where can they do that?
Well, I guess the best place is probably LinkedIn. They can find out about what I'm doing. And if you have any questions, just connect with me on LinkedIn and I will definitely try my best to respond.
Thank you so much, Jenny. It's a pleasure having you on.
No, it was so fun to be chatting. I think the time just literally just flew past.
Same here. All right. So I'm gonna click stop on my record.